Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it, then let's evaluate together. The rain was coming down in sheets outside Mama Rosa's diner, a run-down little joint tucked into a corner of Detroit's east side. The neon sign buzzed faintly, its pink glow flickering like it was on its last legs, casting jagged reflections across the wet pavement. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and grease, the kind of scent that stuck to your clothes long after you left. It was 10:30 p.m., and Maria Delgado was wiping down the last sticky table, her back screaming from a double shift. Her uniform, a faded red apron over a white blouse, was spotless but threadbare, the hem fraying from too many washes. Dark circles hung under her eyes, but she still managed a tired smile as she waved off the last customer. "Thanks for coming, y'all. Have a good night," she called, her voice automatic, worn smooth by repetition. She glanced at the clock above the counter, 10:32 now, and sighed. Her mom was probably asleep back at their cramped apartment a few miles away, the TV humming low with some late-night game show. Her little brother Tommy would be sprawled on the couch, pretending to do homework, but really sneaking glances at his phone. Maria rubbed her neck, calculating. Tips tonight were decent, $42 stuffed into a crumpled envelope in her purse. But after Mom's meds and Tommy's school supplies, there'd be nothing left for a cab. Another night on the packed, sweaty subway it was. She grabbed a rag and started scrubbing a ketchup stain, muttering to herself, "One day, Maria, you're gonna get out of this grind." The bell above the door jingled, sharp and sudden, cutting through the patter of rain. Maria turned, ready to say they were closed, when she saw them. A tall guy in a soaked designer coat, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6. The man's face was drawn. Tired lines etched deep around his eyes, but his clothes screamed money. A tailored gray suit under that coat, shoes that probably cost more than Maria's rent. The girl, though, Sophie, she'd learn later, looked like a ghost. Pale cheeks, dark hair plastered to her forehead from the rain, and eyes so big and hollow they could swallow you whole. She clutched a soggy stuffed bunny, its ears drooping like it was as beat as she was. "Sorry, we're about to—" Maria started, but the guy cut her off, his voice low and rough, like he hadn't slept in days. "Please, just a quick meal. My daughter hasn't eaten dinner yet." He glanced down at the girl, who didn't look up, just stared at the chipped linoleum floor. Maria's eyes flicked to Sophie, and something twisted in her chest. Those eyes. They reminded her of herself at that age, back when her dad walked out and left them with nothing but a stack of bills and a broken-down Chevy. She softened, kneeling down to Sophie's level, her knees popping from the effort. "Hey, kiddo, you hungry? I bet we've got some chocolate chip pancakes left. How's that sound?" Sophie's head tilted up just a fraction, her lips parting like she wasn't sure she could trust the offer. Then, a tiny nod. "Yeah," she whispered, so quiet Maria almost missed it. Maria grinned, standing up. "All right, one order of the good stuff, coming right up." She caught the guy's eye, James, she'd find out soon enough, and jerked her head toward a booth. "Take a seat, won't be long." James Carter slid into the booth, his wet coat dripping onto the cracked vinyl seat. He set his phone on the table, screen still glowing with unread emails, but his attention stayed on Sophie. She climbed in across from him, bunny in her lap, and stared out the window at the rain. He rubbed his face, feeling the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. At 42, his life was a treadmill of board meetings, contracts, and a penthouse overlooking the Detroit River that felt more like a showroom than a home. 2 years since his wife Laura died, car accident, quick and brutal, and he still didn't know how to talk to Sophie. The nannies came and went, each one quitting faster than the last, none of them breaking through the wall she'd built. Until tonight. Maria hustled behind the counter, flipping on the griddle with a hiss. She cracked eggs, poured batter, tossed in a handful of chocolate chips. Her dad's old trick, back when he ran Taco Haven, and she'd sit on a stool watching him cook. The memory stung, but she shook it off, focusing on the sizzle. When she slid the plate in front of Sophie, steam curling up, the girl's eyes widened just a bit. "Go on, dig in," Maria said, leaning against the booth with a wink. "Made 'em special for you." Sophie picked up her fork, hesitant, then took a bite. A small, real smile flickered across her face. Nothing big, but enough to hit James like a punch. He froze, coffee mug halfway to his mouth. When was the last time he'd seen her smile? Months? Longer? He set the mug down, watching as Maria pulled something from her apron pocket, a folded piece of pink paper. She knelt again, unfolding it into a butterfly, its wings creased but perfect. "My dad taught me how to make these when I was your age," Maria said, handing it to Sophie. "This one's for you, okay?" Sophie took it, turning it over in her hands like it was treasure. "It's pretty," she murmured, and James felt his throat tighten. Pretty. A word she hadn't used since Laura. "Thanks," he said, voice gruff, catching Maria's eye. "She doesn't usually open up like that." Maria shrugged, standing up with a tired stretch. "Kids just need someone to listen, you know. She's a sweetheart." She glanced at the clock, 10:45 now, and started clearing their cups. "Y'all take your time, though. No rush." James watched her move, the way she carried herself, exhausted but steady, like she'd been holding up the world too long. He didn't know her story, not yet, but something about her felt real in a way his polished, empty life didn't. Sophie ate another bite, clutching the butterfly, and for the first time in forever, James didn't check his phone. He just sat there, listening to the rain and the soft clink of Maria stacking plates behind the counter. Back at their table, Maria's mind was spinning. She'd seen guys like him before, rich, distracted, dragging their kids around like afterthoughts. But the way he looked at Sophie, like he was drowning and didn't know how to swim, stuck with her. She shook her head, tossing the rag into the sink. "Get it together, Maria," she muttered. "He's just a customer." When they finished, James pulled out his wallet, sliding a couple of 20s across the table, way more than the bill. "Keep the change," he said, standing up, Sophie's hand in his. Maria looked at the cash, then back at him, her jaw tight. "That's too much, man. I can't take it." "Why not? You earned it." She pushed most of it back, her voice firm but kind. "I didn't do anything special, just treated her like she deserves." She nodded at Sophie, who gave a shy wave, butterfly still in hand. James blinked, caught off guard. In his world, people grabbed what they could get. This was different. "Fair enough," he said, pocketing the extra bills. "Good night, then." "Night," Maria replied, watching them step out into the rain. Sophie turned back at the door, waving the butterfly. And Maria waved too, a small ache blooming in her chest. She didn't know it yet, but that little girl and her dad were about to turn her life upside down. As James buckled Sophie into the back seat of his sleek black Audi, she held the butterfly up, studying it in the dim streetlight. "Did you like dinner, kiddo?" he asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," she said, then paused, her voice soft. "She's nice, like a real mom." The words hit him hard, sharper than the rain against the windshield. A real mom. Not the nannies who clocked out at 6, not the women he dated who saw Sophie as a hurdle. He gripped the steering wheel, staring ahead as the diner's lights faded behind them. "Yeah," he said finally. "She is." "Hey, folks. Did Maria's little paper butterfly tug at your heartstrings? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Tell us what you'd do if you were James right now. More twists are coming your way." The next Tuesday night, the rain had let up, but the air outside Mama Rosa's diner still hung heavy with that damp, gritty Detroit chill. Inside, the jukebox was croaking out an old Motown tune, the bass fuzzy from a busted speaker. Maria Delgado leaned against the counter, scribbling on a napkin. $42 from last week's tips, minus $30 for Mom's pills, $10 for Tommy's bus pass, $2 left. She snorted, crumpling the napkin and tossing it into the trash. "Big spender," she muttered, wiping her hands on her apron. The diner was dead tonight, just a trucker nursing a coffee in the corner and the hum of the fridge kicking on every few minutes. The bell jingled, and Maria's head snapped up. There they were again, James Carter and little Sophie, stepping in like they'd never left. James's suit was crisp this time. No rain to ruin it, but his eyes still carried that tired weight. Sophie clung to his hand, her bunny tucked under her arm, a faint spark in her face that hadn't been there last week. Maria grinned, despite herself. "Well, look who's back. You two hooked on my pancakes already?" Sophie's lips twitched into a shy smile. "They're the best," she said, barely above a whisper, and Maria felt a little glow in her chest. James slid into the same booth as before, setting his phone face down this time. "She wouldn't stop talking about them all week," he said, his voice softer than last time, like he was testing the waters. "Figured we'd make it a thing." "A thing, huh?" Maria raised an eyebrow, grabbing a menu she knew they wouldn't need. "All right, chocolate chip special for the VIPs. Be right back." She turned to the griddle, flipping it on with a practiced flick, the sizzle of batter filling the air. As she worked, she caught James watching. Not her, but Sophie, who was tracing the butterfly's wings with her finger, lost in her own world. Something about it tugged at her, but she brushed it off. "Just a job, Maria. Don't get mushy." When she set the plate down, Sophie dug in, and James leaned back, sipping his coffee. "You're good with her," he said, almost like he was surprised. "She doesn't warm up to people easy." Maria shrugged, wiping her hands on a rag. "Kids are simple, man. Give 'em a little attention, they light up. She's a good one, though. Quiet, but you can tell she's got a big heart." "Yeah," James said, his gaze dropping to the table. "She used to be louder. Before." Maria didn't push. She'd heard that tone before. Grief, thick and unspoken. Instead, she nodded at Sophie. "Hey, kiddo. You bring anything to show me tonight? Sophie's eyes flicked up, and she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled drawing, stick figures in crayon, a woman with dark hair holding a little girl's hand. "It's me and Mommy," she said, voice small but steady. "I made it at school." Maria took it, smoothing it out on the table. "This is awesome, Sophie. Your mom looks real pretty. Bet she'd love those pancakes too, huh?" Sophie nodded, a flicker of pride breaking through her usual shadow. James watched, his coffee forgotten, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Maria handed the drawing back, and Sophie tucked it away like a secret. "Thanks, Miss Maria," she said, and James damn near dropped his mug. Miss Maria. She'd given herself a title. That was the start of it. Over the next 2 weeks, James and Sophie showed up every few nights, Tuesday, Friday, sometimes Sunday, like clockwork. Sophie brought more drawings, shyly handing them over, and Maria treated each one like it belonged in the Louvre. James started talking more, too, small stuff at first, about the weather or the Tigers' losing streak, but it felt like he was thawing out. Maria didn't mind. The tips were good, and Sophie's little smiles were better than any paycheck. But back home, things were falling apart. Maria stumbled into their apartment one night, bone-tired, and found Tommy sneaking in through the fire escape, his hoodie reeking of cigarette smoke and something sharper. "Where the hell you been?" she snapped, dropping her purse on the sagging couch. Tommy glared, kicking off his sneakers. "Out. What's it to you?" "It's to me, 'cause I'm busting my ass to keep us afloat, and you're, what, running around with God knows who." She stepped closer, catching a glint of cash peeking from his pocket. "Tommy, what's that?" He yanked his hoodie shut. "None of your business, Maria. I'm not a kid anymore. You're 16, and Mom's coughing her lungs out in there. You think this helps her?" Her voice cracked and Tommy flinched, but he didn't back down. "Maybe if you hadn't dropped out, I wouldn't have to hustle," he shot back. "You're not my mom, so quit acting like it." The words stung, but before she could fire back, he stormed off to his room, slamming the door. Maria sank onto the couch, head in her hands. Hustle. What was he into? She'd heard rumors. Kids from their block getting mixed up with the casinos downtown, running errands for shady types. She couldn't lose him, not after everything. The next night at the diner, James and Sophie were back, and Maria was still rattled. She plated the pancakes on autopilot, her smile tight. James noticed. "Rough day?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "You could say that," she muttered, then caught Sophie's curious look. "Just family stuff, kiddo. You know how it goes." Sophie tilted her head. "Do you have a brother?" "Yeah, Tommy. He's 16 and thinks he's hot stuff." Maria forced a laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. James set his spoon down, leaning forward. "Sounds like a handful. You raising him?" "Trying to. Mom's sick. Lungs, you know. So it's on me." She shrugged, like it was no big deal, but James didn't buy it. He'd seen that look before, carrying too much, pretending it didn't hurt. They ate in quiet for a bit, the jukebox switching to Marvin Gaye, until Sophie finished and started folding her napkin into a clumsy butterfly. James watched her, then cleared his throat. "Maria, can I ask you something?" She glanced up, wiping the counter. "Shoot." I've been looking for someone to watch Sophie afternoons. 4 hours a day, weekends off. Pays good. Better than here. He named a figure, 3 times her diner wages, and Maria's rag stopped mid-swipe. She likes you. Hell, she talks about you non-stop. What do you say? Maria blinked, the number bouncing around her head. That kind of cash could cover Mom's meds, get Tommy out of whatever mess he was in. But leave the diner? She'd been here 5 years, knew every crack in the floor, every regular's order. And James, he was a stranger, suit or not. That's a lot, she said finally. Why me? I'm no nanny. 'Cause you're the first person she's smiled at in 2 years, he said, voice low, raw. I don't need a nanny. I need someone she trusts. Maria looked at Sophie, who was grinning at her napkin butterfly like it was magic. Her heart did a little flip. Okay, but I've got rules, she said, crossing her arms. I'm not just a babysitter you ditch when you're bored. And you gotta be there. 1 hour a day, no phone, just you and her. She needs her dad, not a paycheck. James stared, caught off guard, then nodded slow. Deal. 1 hour. No phone. All right then, Maria said, sticking out her hand. He shook it, his grip firm but warm, and Sophie clapped, her bunny bouncing in her lap. Miss Maria's coming home with us? Maria laughed, real this time. Guess I am, kiddo. As they left, James slipped her a business card. Carter Enterprises, CEO. And Maria tucked it in her apron, her mind racing. This could work. This could change things. But as she locked up the diner, the weight of Tommy's words, "You're not my mom," settled back in her gut. She'd figure it out. She always did. Who's rooting for Maria to take the leap? Subscribe to catch every twist, and let us know in the comments. What's the toughest choice you've ever made? The penthouse on the 32nd floor of the Renaissance Center gleamed under the Detroit skyline, all glass and steel and sharp edges. Maria Delgado stepped off the elevator her first day on the job, her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble. She adjusted the strap of her beat-up backpack, feeling like a fish out of water. The place smelled like leather and money, nothing like the stale coffee and fryer grease of Mama Rosa's diner. Sophie darted out from a hallway, her bunny swinging in her hand, and grabbed Maria's arm. "Miss Maria, come see my room." Maria laughed, letting the little girl tug her along. "Lead the way, kiddo." Sophie's room was a mess of crayons and stuffed animals, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection outside. Maria dropped her bag and plopped onto the rug, helping Sophie arrange her drawings into a lopsided gallery on the wall. "You're an artist, huh? These are going up in a museum someday," Sophie beamed, taping up a picture of a butterfly. "You think so?" "No so," Maria said, ruffling her hair. Over the next few weeks, the penthouse started to shift. Sophie's giggles echoed down the halls, drowning out the usual silence. Maria brought in a couple of cheap potted plants from the corner store, setting them on the kitchen counter, little bursts of green against the cold chrome. James noticed, too. He'd come home early one night, tie loosened, and found them baking cookies, flour dusting Sophie's cheeks. "What's all this?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Cookie chaos," Maria grinned, sliding a tray into the oven. "Your girl's a pro. Right, Soph?" Sophie nodded, holding up a lumpy cookie. Try one, Daddy. James took a bite, his face softening. Not bad, kiddo. He caught Maria's eye, a flicker of something, gratitude maybe, passing between them. That hour he'd promised. No phone. Started feeling less like a chore. They'd play board games or read stories. Sophie nestled between them on the couch, and Maria could see him trying, really trying, to be there. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Back at her apartment, Maria's world was fraying. Tommy was dodging her questions, coming home later each night with cash he wouldn't explain. One evening, she cornered him in the kitchen, the hum of Mom's oxygen tank buzzing from the next room. "Tommy, talk to me," she said, arms crossed. "Where's this money coming from?" He shoved past her, grabbing a soda from the fridge. "I'm handling it, Maria. Lay off." "Handling it? You're sneaking around like some punk. What if you get caught?" Her voice rose, sharp with worry. "Then I'll deal with it," he snapped, slamming the can down. "You're not the only one who gets to play hero." He stormed out, leaving her staring at the cracked linoleum, her stomach in knots. She couldn't shake the feeling he was tangled up in something bad. Casinos, maybe worse. At the penthouse, things were humming along until Mrs. Evelyn Harper showed up. She'd been Sophie's last nanny, a wiry woman with pinched lips and a grudge James didn't even know about. She knocked one afternoon while Maria was helping Sophie with a puzzle, her voice clipped through the intercom. "Mr. Carter asked me to pick up some files. Let me in." Maria buzzed her up, uneasy. Evelyn swept in, her heels clicking, and barely glanced at Sophie. "So you're the new girl," she said, eyeing Maria like she was dirt on her shoe. "Hope you last longer than I did." "Didn't plan on it being a competition," Maria shot back, keeping her tone light for Sophie's sake. Evelyn smirked, rifling through a desk drawer, then paused, pulling out an old Carter Enterprises folder. She flipped it open, her eyes narrowing, and slid it across to Maria. "You might want to see this." Maria frowned, taking the folder. It was a report, dry corporate stuff, numbers and dates, but one name jumped out. Taco Haven Acquisition, 2010. Her breath caught. Taco Haven. Her dad's place. The little Mexican joint where he'd slung tacos and taught her origami until Carter Enterprises bought it out, fired everyone, and turned it into a parking lot. She'd been 12 when it happened, watching her dad, Hector, spiral, drinking, disappearing, leaving them with nothing. "What's this?" she asked, voice tight, though she already knew. Evelyn's smile was cold. "Ask your boss. He signed off on it. Ruined a lot of folks, my brother included. Good luck working for him." She grabbed her files and left, the door clicking shut like a gunshot. Maria stood there, the folder trembling in her hands. Sophie tugged her sleeve. "Miss Maria, you okay?" "Yeah, kiddo," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just need a sec." She waited until James got home, his coat slung over his arm, looking lighter than usual, until he saw her face. "We need to talk," she said, holding up the folder. "Now!" They stepped into his study, a sleek room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk that probably cost more than her rent for a year. She slapped the folder down. "Taco Haven. That ring a bell?" James glanced at it, confusion creasing his brow, then recognition. That was, years ago, one of dozens of deals, Why? Why? Maria's voice shook, anger bubbling up. That was my dad's place, James. 20 years he poured into it, and your company trashed it. Fired everyone, no warning, no nothing. He never recovered, drank himself stupid, left us. My mom worked 3 jobs, I dropped college, all 'cause of your deal. James paled, stepping back. Maria, I didn't know. It was just business back then. Numbers, not people. I swear I didn't. Business? She cut him off, tears pricking her eyes. That business destroyed my family, left us with nothing but bills and a ghost, and you didn't even blink. She grabbed her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. I can't do this. I'm out. Maria, wait. He reached for her, but she pulled away, her voice breaking. Tell Sophie I'm sorry. She deserves better than this. She stormed out, the elevator doors sliding shut behind her as tears finally spilled over. The city lights blurred through the glass, and she pressed her forehead against it, chest heaving. How could she have trusted him? Back in the penthouse, James sank into his chair, the folder staring up at him like an accusation. Sophie shuffled in, Bunny in her arms, her voice small. Daddy, where's Miss Maria? She had to go, kiddo, he said, throat tight. Just for now. Sophie's lip trembled, but she promised she'd stay. She ran to her room, slamming the door, and James buried his face in his hands. The next morning, his phone buzzed. Board meeting. Urgent. The suits at Carter Enterprises were pissed about his new, soft policies, threatening to oust him if he didn't shape up. He stared at the screen, Sophie's sobs echoing in his head, and wondered how the hell he'd fix this. Maria, meanwhile, trudged back to Mama Rosa's, her apron feeling heavier than ever. The diner's familiar hum didn't comfort her this time, just reminded her of everything she'd lost, then and now. She wiped a table, her hands shaking, and muttered, "Screw you, James Carter." But deep down, she couldn't shake Sophie's face, or the way James had looked at her, like he'd actually meant it when he said he didn't know. Ouch. That hurt. Will Maria ever forgive James? Hit subscribe and tell us, could you let go of a past like that? The Detroit River glittered under a gray morning sky, but James Carter barely noticed from his penthouse window. He hadn't slept, the silence of the place pressing in like a weight. Sophie's door had stayed shut since Maria left 2 nights ago, her muffled cries leaking out every so often. He'd tried knocking, talking through the wood. Nothing worked. The folder from Evelyn Harper sat on his desk, a ghost he couldn't shake. Taco Haven Acquisition, 2010. Just a line item back then, one of 100 deals he'd signed off on without a second thought. Now it was a wrecking ball through his life. He grabbed his coat and keys, a plan half-formed in his head. If Maria wouldn't talk to him, and she hadn't answered his calls, he'd go to the source. Rosa Delgado's address wasn't hard to find. A quick call to his assistant pulled it up from some old diner records. He drove across town, the Audi's hum cutting through the rundown streets of Maria's neighborhood. Boarded up storefronts, potholes big enough to swallow a tire. The apartment building was a squat brick thing, paint peeling off the walls like old skin. He knocked, and Rosa answered, her oxygen tube trailing behind her like a leash. Her eyes narrowed, sharp, despite the exhaustion carved into her face. "You're him," she said, voice raspy. "The suit Maria works for. What do you want?" "To understand," James said, hands in his pockets. "And to say I'm sorry. Can I come in?" Rosa studied him, then stepped aside, grudging. The apartment was small, cluttered with faded furniture and the faint beep of medical equipment. She pointed to a couch sagging in the middle. "Sit. You've got 5 minutes." He didn't waste them. "I didn't know about Taco Haven, what it did to your family. I'm trying to make it right." He pulled out his phone, showing her a draft email. Haven Fund. Support for families impacted by Carter Enterprises acquisitions, starting with Taco Haven employees. "It's not just talk. I've got lawyers working on compensation, too." Rosa took the phone, squinting at the screen, then handed it back. "Words are cheap, Mr. Carter. My husband, Hector, he was a good man till your company took his pride. Depression ate him alive, and he left us. Do you think money fixes that?" "No," James said, meeting her gaze. "But it's a start. I'm not the guy I was back then." She coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and waved him off. "Prove it then. Maria's hurting, and I don't mean just about you." She nodded toward a stack of photos on the table. Hector, in his chef's apron, grinning with a tiny Maria on his shoulders. James picked one up, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just business. This was a life. Across town, Maria was back at Mama Rosa's, scrubbing the counter like it owed her money. The diner felt emptier without Sophie's chatter, and every jingle of the bell made her flinch, half expecting James to walk in. She hadn't told Tommy about quitting. Didn't want another fight. But he'd been scarce anyway, slipping out before dawn. She was rinsing a coffee pot when the door banged open, and there he was. Hector Delgado, her dad, looking like a shadow of the man she'd known. Gray stubble, clothes hanging off him, eyes bloodshot but pleading. "Maria," he croaked, stepping inside. "I need to talk." She froze, the pot slipping from her hands into the sink with a clatter. "You've got some nerve," she said, voice low. "Dangerous. Get out. Please, mija." He held up his hands, shaky. "I've been a mess. I know. I couldn't face you. Couldn't face myself after Taco Haven. But I'm here now." "Here now." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You left us 15 years ago, Dad. Mom's dying in there. Tommy's God knows where. And I'm holding it together with duct tape. Where were you when we needed you?" Hector's face crumpled, and he sank into a booth, head in his hands. "I lost everything. My job, my dignity. I thought you'd be better off without me dragging you down." "Better off?" Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. "We weren't better, Dad. We were broken. And you don't get to waltz in now like it's all good." "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know I never stopped loving you." Maria turned away, gripping the counter, her chest tight. She wanted to scream, to throw him out, but his words stuck like thorns. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Tommy's school. "Miss Delgado, your brother's been detained. Fight at a casino downtown. We need you here." Her heart dropped. "What?" She hung up, grabbing her keys, barely glancing at Hector. "Stay or go, I don't care. I've got bigger problems." The precinct was a buzz of noise and fluorescent lights when she got there. Tommy sat in a holding room, a bruise blooming on his cheek, his hoodie torn. "What the hell, Tommy?" She snapped, arms crossed. "A casino?" He glared at the floor. "I was running bets for some guys. Easy cash. Thought I could help Mom." "Help Mom?" She paced, furious. "You're 16, not some street hustler. They're pressing charges. How's that helping?" "I didn't know what else to do," he yelled, voice breaking. "You're killing yourself at that diner, and I'm supposed to just watch?" Maria stopped, his words hitting like a slap. She sank into a chair, head in her hands. She couldn't fix this, not alone. Then on impulse, she pulled out James's card, still crumpled in her pocket from that first night. She dialed, her voice shaking when he picked up. "James, it's Maria. I need a favor. Tommy's in trouble. Cops, casino stuff. Can you help?" He didn't hesitate. "Where are you? I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, James walked in, suit pristine but eyes tired. He shook hands with the desk sergeant, made a call to a lawyer friend, and within an hour, Tommy was out. No charges, just a warning. Maria watched, stunned, as he signed something and handed it over. "How'd you—" she started, but he cut her off. "Connections," he said simply. "You okay?" "No," she admitted, glancing at Tommy slouched against the wall. "But thanks. I didn't expect you to—" "I owed you," he said, voice low. "And I meant what I said. I'm trying to fix things. Not just for you, for everyone I hurt." She studied him, the folder flashing in her mind. "Why now, James? After all this time?" "'Cause you made me see it," he said raw. "You and Sophie. I was running from her. Laura's gone, and I didn't know how to be a dad. You showed me what I was missing." Maria's throat tightened, but she didn't respond. Tommy shuffled over, mumbling a grudging, "Thanks, man," and James nodded. "Let's get you both home," he said, and she didn't argue. Back at the apartment, Rosa was asleep, Hector gone. Left a note saying, "I'll be around if you need me." Maria tucked it away, too drained to deal. James lingered by the door, Sophie's bunny in his car, a reminder of what they'd lost. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "Just think about it. She misses you. I miss you." Maria nodded, too tired to fight. "I'll think," she said, and he left, the door clicking shut. She sank onto the couch, Tommy crashing beside her, silent for once. The weight of the day pressed down. Hector's ghost, Tommy's mess, James's plea. But as she closed her eyes, Sophie's little voice echoed in her head. Miss Maria promised she'd stay. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way back. Big moves from James. Will it be enough? Subscribe for more and drop a comment. Would you give Hector a second chance? The rain was back, hammering Detroit like it had a grudge. Maria Delgado stood behind the counter at Mama Rosa's diner, staring out the streaked window as water sluiced down the glass. It had been a week since James bailed Tommy out, a week of restless nights and Sophie's little voice looping in her head. Miss Maria promised she'd stay. She hadn't called him back, hadn't gone back. The folder from Evelyn Harper still burned in her memory, a reminder of everything Carter Enterprises had taken, her dad, her future, her trust. but James's face at the precinct, the way he jumped to help without a second thought, gnawed at her too. The bell jingled and she turned, half expecting him. Instead, it was Tommy, soaked to the bone, his hoodie dripping on the floor. "You're late," she said, tossing him a rag. "Shift started 10 minutes ago." "Yeah, well, I had stuff," he muttered, wiping his face. He'd been quieter since the casino mess, sticking closer to home, but the tension between them hadn't eased. She didn't push, didn't have the energy. They worked in silence, the diner half empty, just a couple of regulars nursing beers and a flickering TV in the corner. Then the door banged open again, and there was James, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his eyes wild. "Maria," he said, voice rough. "Sophie's gone." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "She overheard me on the phone, telling my assistant you weren't coming back. She took off, said she was going to find you." He ran a hand through his wet hair, frantic. "I've looked everywhere. Her school, the park. She's got her bunny, but it's pouring out there." Maria grabbed her jacket, heart pounding. "When'd she leave?" "Hour ago, maybe less. I thought she was in her room, but..." He stopped, guilt choking his words. "All right, we'll find her," Maria said, shoving past the panic. "Tommy, cover the diner. Call if she shows up." She didn't wait for his nod, bolting out with James into the storm. The rain hit like needles, soaking her through in seconds as they split up. James toward the riverfront, Maria toward the old neighborhood streets Sophie might have wandered. She ran, boots splashing through puddles, calling Sophie's name until her throat burned. "Sophie! Kiddo! Where are you?" The wind swallowed her voice, but she kept going, checking alleys, bus stops, anywhere a scared 6-year-old might hide. Her mind raced. Sophie, alone, cold, looking for her. Guilt clawed at her chest. She should have called, should have gone back. 20 minutes in, her phone buzzed. James. "Found her," he said, breathless. "Under the oak by the diner. Meet me there. Me." Maria sprinted back, lungs aching, and saw them. James kneeling in the mud, Sophie curled against him, her bunny sodden and clutched tight. The big oak loomed over them, its branches swaying in the wind. Maria dropped beside them, rain streaking her face. "Sophie, oh my God, you okay?" Sophie looked up, eyes red, the pink butterfly crumpled in her hand. "I wanted you to come back," she whispered, shivering. "You promised." Maria pulled her into a hug, soaking wet and all, tears mixing with the rain. "I'm here now, kiddo. I'm so sorry." She glanced at James, his face a mess of relief and exhaustion, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or the edge of something deeper. They got Sophie into James's car, cranking the heat as she huddled under Maria's jacket. Back at the penthouse, Maria dried her off, wrapping her in a blanket while James made hot chocolate. Sophie clung to her, quiet but steady, and finally drifted off on the couch, bunny in her arms. Maria watched her sleep, the knot in her chest loosening just a bit. James handed her a mug, his voice low. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do if..." "Don't." She cut him off, staring into the steam. "She's safe. That's what matters." He nodded, sinking into a chair. "I meant what I said, Maria. I'm changing things. Haven Fund's live. First checks go out next week. I'm not that guy anymore. She studied him, the lines on his face deeper in the dim light. Maybe, but trust's a long road, James. I don't know if I can walk it with you. I'll wait, he said raw. As long as it takes. For her and you. She didn't answer, the weight of his words settling in. They sat in silence, the storm raging outside, until her phone buzzed again. Tommy. Maria, you better get back. Trouble. She frowned, stepping into the hall to take it. What's up? Some suits showed up. Carter Enterprises guys. They're pissed, saying James is tanking the company with his charity crap. They're talking about shutting the diner down. Say it's a liability or something. Maria's blood ran cold. What? They can't. They're outside now, yelling about permits. I don't know, sis, it's bad. She hung up, turning to James, fury sparking. Your people are at the diner, threatening to close it. This your idea of change? His eyes widened, shock genuine. No, God, no. The board's been on my ass about the fund, but I didn't. He grabbed his phone, dialing fast. Mike, what the hell's going on at Mama Rosa's? I don't care what they voted. Call it off. Now. He hung up, meeting her glare. I didn't know, Maria. They're fighting me every step. Want me out if I don't play their game. And what's your game? She snapped. Fix one mess, make another? That diner's all I've got left. I'll stop it, he said, desperate. I swear. Come with me, we'll go now. She hesitated, Sophie's soft breathing anchoring her. Fine. But this is it, James. One more screw-up, and I'm done. They drove back through the rain, Sophie asleep in the back seat, pulling up to Mama Rosa's, where 3 suits and overcoats stood under umbrellas, arguing with Tommy. A small crowd had gathered, regulars, neighbors, shouting back. You can't take this place, an old guy yelled, shaking his fist. It's ours. James stepped out, voice cutting through the noise. Stand down. This ends now. One suit, a slick guy with a smirk, turned. Carter, you're done. Board's voting you out tomorrow. This little stunt's just the start. Then vote, James shot back. But you're not touching this diner. It's off limits. Maria stepped up beside him, arms crossed. You heard him. Get lost. The suits grumbled, retreating as the crowd cheered, but the victory felt hollow. Tommy pulled Maria aside, voice low. They're not done, sis. I heard 'em. Plan B's coming. She nodded, dread pooling in her gut. James turned to her, rain dripping off his face. I'll fight this, Maria. I'm not letting them win. Maybe, she said, voice flat. But I can't keep betting on you. She walked back inside, leaving him in the storm, the diner's neon sign buzzing overhead. Sophie stirred in the car, murmuring her name, and Maria's resolve cracked, just a little. But the board, the past, the lies. It was too much. She couldn't see a way through. James watched her go, the weight of it all crashing down. The board wanted him gone. Sophie needed him whole, and Maria was slipping away. He clenched his fists, rain soaking through his suit. He'd lost Laura. He wouldn't lose them too. But as the crowd dispersed and the night swallowed the diner, it felt like the fight was already over. Heartbreak City. Can they save Sophie and themselves? Subscribe now and tell us, how would you fix this mess? The morning after the storm broke gray and quiet over Detroit, the kind of stillness that follows chaos. Maria Delgado sat at the kitchen table in her apartment, a chipped mug of coffee cooling in her hands. The diner had survived the night. James's call had scared off the suits for now, but the weight of it all still pressed down. Tommy was asleep on the couch, his bruised face peaceful for once, and Rose's oxygen tank hummed softly from the bedroom. Maria stared at the stack of bills on the table, her mind replaying Sophie's voice. "I wanted you to come back." She hadn't slept, couldn't shake the image of that little girl in the rain, or James's desperate eyes. She reached for her purse, digging for her keys, when her fingers brushed something stiff, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. She pulled it out, frowning. It was Hector's handwriting, scrawled in the note he'd left last week. "I'll be around if you need me." But this wasn't that note. She unfolded it, and her breath caught. A letter, dated years ago, tucked into an envelope she'd never seen. "Maria, mija," it started. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Not 'cause I wanted to leave you, but 'cause I couldn't face what I'd become. Taco Haven was my heart, and when it went, I broke. I don't blame them, the suits, the money men. I blame me. You're stronger than I ever was. Don't let my mess hold you back. Te amo, siempre." "Papa." Maria's hands shook, tears blurring the ink. He didn't blame them. All these years, she'd carried that rage, at Carter Enterprises, at James, thinking it was their fault her dad fell apart. But Hector had owned it, in his messy, broken way. She pressed the letter to her chest, a sob catching in her throat. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about her letting go. Across town, James Carter stood in his penthouse, staring at the city sprawled below. Sophie was still asleep, her bunny tucked under her chin, but the board meeting loomed. 11 a.m., a vote to kick him out. He'd spent the night on the phone, calling in every favor, drafting a resignation letter he didn't want to send. The Haven Fund was live, checks cut for Taco Haven's old crew, but the suits didn't care. Profits over people, always. He rubbed his face, Laura's photo on the desk, watching him. "What do I do, babe?" he muttered. "I can't lose her too." Sophie shuffled in, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, is Miss Maria coming today?" He knelt, pulling her close. "I don't know, kiddo. I messed up bad, but I'm gonna fix it, for you." She hugged him, small but fierce. "You're not supposed to lie. You said she'd stay." He swallowed hard. "You're right. No more lies." He stood, decision snapping into place. Screw the board. He'd walk away, start over, keep what mattered. He grabbed his phone, texting Maria, "Meet me at the diner, please. One last shot." Maria saw the text as she wiped her eyes, Hector's letter still in her lap. She hesitated, then grabbed her jacket. "Tommy?" she called. "Watch Mom. I'll be back." He grunted, half awake, and she was out the door. Mama Rosa's diner buzzed with its usual morning crowd, truckers, retirees, the smell of bacon grease thick in the air. James was already there, in a booth with Sophie, looking out of place in his rumpled suit. Maria slid in across from them, heart pounding. Sophie lit up, scrambling over to hug her. Miss Maria, you came. Hey, kiddo, Maria said, squeezing her tight. Couldn't stay away from you. She met James's gaze, steady but guarded. What's this about? He leaned forward, hands clasped. I'm done with Carter Enterprises. Resigning today. Board can have it. Haven funds funded. Taco Haven's reopening as a training program. Named it after your dad. I'm not asking you to work for me, Maria. I'm asking you to come home. With us. She blinked, stunned. You're quitting? Yeah. They want the old me, ruthless, all business. I'm not him anymore. You showed me that. He reached across, not quite touching her hand. I can't undo the past, but I can build something better. For Sophie, for you, for all the families I screwed over. Maria looked at Sophie, who was watching with big, hopeful eyes, then back at James. I found a letter from my dad, she said, voice soft. He didn't blame you, or anyone. Just himself. I've been holding this hate so long I forgot how to let it go. But I'm trying. Does that mean... James started, but she held up a hand. It means I'll come back. Not as your employee, never that again. As us. But slow, James. Trust's gotta grow. He nodded, relief flooding his face. Slow's good. I'll prove it every day. Sophie clapped, bouncing in her seat. We're a family now? Maria smiled, tears pricking. Yeah, kiddo, maybe we are. 2 months later, the sun cut through the clouds over Hart Plaza, a riverside park buzzing with laughter and chatter. The Haven Fund's first community picnic sprawled across the grass, blankets, folding tables piled with food, kids chasing each other between the trees. Maria moved through the crowd, a tray of tacos in her hands, the smell of cumin and lime wafting up. Rosa sat nearby, oxygen tank at her side, chatting with an old Taco Haven cook who'd gotten his first check from the fund. Tommy lingered by the grill, flipping burgers, a rare grin on his face. He'd started culinary classes at the new Taco Haven site, a deal Maria struck to keep him out of trouble. James weaved through, jeans and a t-shirt replacing his suits, carrying a cooler of sodas. He'd walked away from Carter Enterprises that day at the diner, and the board hadn't fought it, too busy scrambling to replace him. The fund was his focus now, and Taco Haven's rebuild was underway, a kitchen training program for folks like Hector, a second chance in brick and mortar. He set the cooler down, catching Maria's eye. Need a hand, chef? Always, she said, passing him the tray. Sophie's over there. Thinks she's the boss of the bounce house. He laughed, glancing at his daughter, who was directing a line of kids with all the seriousness of a 6-year-old dictator. She gets that from her mom. And you? Maria teased, nudging him. They'd moved out of the penthouse last month into a brownstone closer to her old neighborhood. Smaller, warmer, with a room for Rosa downstairs. It wasn't perfect. James still got antsy without a boardroom. Maria worried about Tommy slipping. But it felt like home. The picnic stretched into the afternoon, a mix of fun families and diner regulars. Hector showed up, hesitant, lingering at the edge with a paper plate. Maria spotted him, took a breath, and walked over. Hey, Dad. He looked up, sheepish. Didn't know if I should come. You're here now, she said, handing him a taco. "That's something." He took it, eyes glistening. "Thanks, mija." She nodded, not quite ready for more, but it was a start. Back at the main table, James pulled her aside, a small box in his hand. "Been carrying this a while," he said, opening it. A simple ring, silver with a tiny diamond. No pressure, no rush, just when you're ready. Maria's breath caught, her hand brushing his. "Slow, remember?" "Slow," he agreed, slipping it back in his pocket. Sophie ran up, tugging them both into a hug, and the crowd cheered. Someone had started a conga line. Maria laughed, letting herself get pulled in, James and Sophie trailing behind. The sun dipped low, painting the river gold, and for the first time in years, Maria felt light. Like the past wasn't a chain anymore, but a story she could rewrite. Later, as they packed up, Sophie yawned, leaning against Maria. "Can we do this every day?" "Not every day, kiddo," Maria said, kissing her forehead. "But we'll keep showing up. Promise." James wrapped an arm around them both, the brownstone waiting ahead. It wasn't a fairy tale. No castles, no magic fix. Just three people, messy and real, building something new from the echoes of what they'd lost. Tears and cheers. What a ride. Did this ending melt your heart? Subscribe for more stories like this and let us know. Where are you watching from today?